The night before the most important evening of my professional life, my mother called to tell me not to expect them. I was standing in my apartment in the West End of Toronto, eating leftover butter chicken and going over my acceptance speech for maybe the fourth time, when her name lit up my phone. I set down the container. Something about the timing already felt wrong. "Hi, Mum." Bridget. She had that voice, the one that means she's already rehearsed what she's about to say. "Your father and I have been talking and we've decided we won't be making it tomorrow night." I waited. "It's your brother," she said. "He and Amanda have been having a very difficult time lately. You know how it's been with the Lakeview project. The stress has been enormous on him, and honestly, Bridget, watching you get up on a stage in front of all those people when he's struggling the way he is, he told me it would be too much. He said it wouldn't be fair to him." I looked at my reflection in the dark kitchen window, 29 years old, about to be named one of Canada's top 40 under 40 in finance. And my mother was on the phone telling me that my brother's feelings about my success mattered more than the success itself. "So neither of you will be there," I said. "We can celebrate separately. We'll take you to the Barton Steakhouse on Saturday. Your dad likes it there." My father got on the line then. I could hear him shuffling in the background, probably in his recliner. "Look, Bridget, it's just a dinner. You don't need us in the room for a dinner. Pick up the plaque and come home this weekend. We'll sort it out." I said, "All right, I'll see you Saturday." I ended the call and stood very still for a long moment. Before I go any further, if you're watching from Canada tonight, or really anywhere in the world, drop it in the comments below. And if you've ever had someone who was supposed to believe in you decide that someone else's comfort mattered more than your biggest moment, hit like, because that is exactly what this story is about. I should tell you who I am, because my family's version and the real version are two very different things. My name is Bridget, and I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, in a house that smelled like sawdust and my father's ego in roughly equal measure. My father, Craig, built a construction company that became something of a local institution: commercial builds, municipal contracts, school renovations. He was on every committee that mattered in the city. He coached minor hockey. He was the kind of man who shook hands too firmly and expected you to notice. My mother, Kathleen, taught piano lessons and organized the fundraiser for St. Joseph's every November and lived entirely for what the women at her Ladies' Association thought of her. And then there was my brother, Ryan. Ryan was 4 years older than me and had been the center of our household's universe for as long as I could remember. When Ryan played poorly in a hockey game, the whole family spent the drive home dissecting what went wrong. When I won the regional mathematics competition at 14, my father said, "Good girl," and went back to his paper. Ryan eventually moved to the GTA, started a development company, married Amanda, and spent the better part of 5 years trying to look considerably richer than he was. I left Hamilton at 18 for the University of Toronto, economics and finance. Graduated top of my program, went straight into Bay Street. I worked 14-hour days for 6 years and made partner before 30. My family genuinely believed I was doing okay. That was the word they used. Okay. My father once told his friends at the golf club that his daughter worked in banking somewhere in Toronto, not because he didn't know what I did. He just couldn't bring himself to say it plainly, because acknowledging my success would have meant acknowledging I had built something entirely without him. Back in my apartment that Tuesday night, I sat on the couch for about 3 minutes. Then I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact saved under one simple name, Anita. She answered on the second ring. "They're not coming," I said. A pause. "I suspected as much when you didn't text by 9. I told her what my mother had said, my brother's feelings, my father calling it just a dinner, the Barton Steakhouse on Saturday as a consolation. There was a sound on Anita's end that I can only describe as quiet certainty. Not happiness exactly, but the sound of something falling into its rightful place. "Well," she said, "then I suppose tomorrow night I'll be presenting that award myself." I closed my eyes. "Are you sure?" "I've been waiting 25 years to stand in the same room as Craig, Bridget. I think I can manage another 24 hours. You need to understand who Anita is, not who she is now, but who she was before she became who she is now." 26 years ago, Anita co-founded a construction and development company in Hamilton with a man she had trusted completely. That man was my father. Anita was the one with the vision, the relationships with city planners, the knowledge of sustainable build practices that were a decade ahead of their time. My father was the operational partner. He managed crews, handled procurement, kept the paperwork moving. Together, they built something real. Then, when the company began pulling in serious contracts, a school renovation in Ancaster, a municipal office build in Stony Creek, my father decided he wanted it for himself. He was methodical about it. Over about 18 months, he forged invoices. He moved funds through a numbered company in a way that looked, on paper, like Anita had been quietly diverting money from the operating account. He reported it to the CRA. He contacted the Ontario Labour Relations Board. He told suppliers she'd been double billing them for years. Anita was under investigation for 14 months. She lost her contractor's license. She burned through her savings defending herself. She was eventually cleared. The investigators could not find sufficient evidence to support any of the allegations, but cleared in a case like that does not mean rested. The industry had already moved on. My father had already changed the locks on the office and filed updated articles of incorporation with his name as sole director. She rebuilt. It took her a long time and required a kind of patience I find almost incomprehensible. But by the time I was hired at my firm, Anita was the chairwoman of a private equity fund specializing in distressed construction and development debt across Canada. She was quietly, devastatingly powerful. I met her at a Bay Street networking event when I was 23. I was the youngest person in the room, and I'd just given a presentation on over-leveraged residential developers in the GTA. Anita came up to me afterward, shook my hand, and said, "Your father's last name is Delaney, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. We went for coffee. She told me everything. I sat across from her, and I thought about every time I'd watched my father shake someone's hand too firmly and expect them to notice, and I understood, finally, what he'd actually done to become the man he was. I didn't apologize for him. That wasn't mine to give. What I did do over the next 5 years was work with Anita to build something that couldn't be undone. My father's company had expanded, and he'd brought my brother in as a development lead. Ryan had convinced him to back a 34-unit condo project on the lakeshore, the Lakeview project my mother had mentioned on the phone. It was over-leveraged from the start, cost overruns. A soil remediation issue the environmental reports had somehow failed to catch. Ryan had taken out high-interest bridge financing through a private lender and pledged my father's construction equipment and 2 commercial properties as collateral. My father, too proud to admit Ryan had made a catastrophic decision, had quietly used the company's line of credit to prop the whole thing up. He had stopped making full contributions to the company pension plan for his long-term employees. He had deferred HST remittances to the CRSA for nearly 2 years. Anita's fund had been tracking the debt. One by one, we purchased the outstanding notes through a series of holding companies registered in Ontario. We owned the bridge financing on the Lakeview project. We held the commercial mortgage on my father's Barton Street yard. We had acquired the arrears on his deferred HST remittances when they were sold through a government collection process. My father had no idea that the fund manager on the other end of every extension request, every restructuring discussion, every quiet accommodation that had kept him from going under, was Anita. And the firm where I worked, the firm presenting me with the award the following evening, was the firm Anita chaired. After I hung up with her that night, I sat with Thomas in our apartment and didn't say much for a while. Thomas is a human rights lawyer and the steadiest person I have ever met. He poured us both a glass of wine and sat beside me and didn't fill the silence. He already knew everything. He'd helped me understand the legal frameworks, the liability implications, what we could do and what we couldn't. He'd been the one who suggested bringing in an OSC compliance officer as a precautionary witness, which we had done quietly 4 months earlier. He looked at me and asked if I was ready. I told him I'd been ready for 5 years. The following evening, the gala was held in the ballroom of the Fairmont Royal York in downtown Toronto. Crystal chandeliers, round tables with white linens, 250 guests from across the Canadian financial and development sectors. The firm had organized the evening beautifully. There was a jazz quartet in the corner, flowers from a greenhouse in Niagara. Thomas and I arrived early. I wore a dark green dress I'd had altered twice because I wanted it to be exactly right. I felt completely calm in a way that surprised me, the way a body goes quiet when it finally knows what it's about to do. What I did not expect was to see my father's car in the valet queue when we pulled up. Thomas saw it too. He said nothing. We walked inside. They were at a table near the back. My father in his dark navy blazer that he wears to every formal occasion, my mother in a copper-colored dress she'd bought for Ryan's wedding rehearsal dinner and had worn to every significant event since. My brother and Amanda were there as well, though they were not on the guest list. Ryan was working the room already, glasses in hand, wearing a fitted suit that I recognized as the kind people buy to look like they're doing better than they are. I found out afterward through the events coordinator that Ryan had called that morning and claimed to be Bridget's family representative, asking to be placed at the event. The coordinator, understandably confused, had seated him without checking with me. I did not go over to them. I kissed Thomas on the cheek, found my seat near the front, and waited. The program began at 7. There were 3 other award recipients before my category. When the Master of Ceremonies reached my name, he announced that this year, given her role at the firm, the chairwoman herself had asked to make the presentation personally. Anita walked out from the left side of the stage. She was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut close and a dark burgundy jacket that projected the kind of authority you cannot manufacture. She walked to the podium without hurrying, adjusted the microphone, and looked out at the room. I was watching my father. The moment the spotlight caught Anita's face, he stopped breathing. I know this because I was looking directly at him and I watched the color drain from his face in under 3 seconds. His hand, which had been resting on the table, went absolutely rigid, the wine glass tilted. My mother caught it automatically, without looking at him, and he didn't notice. He stared at Anita. Anita did not look at him. She spoke about me with a precision and warmth that made my throat tighten. She said she had watched me build something extraordinary, without the benefit of being believed in by the right people. She said that the best professionals she had ever encountered were those who had to find their own way into the room. She said she was proud of me in a way that landed somewhere I hadn't expected. She said my name. I walked up to receive the award. I could hear applause, but what I felt was the solidness of Anita's hand when she shook mine, and the way she looked at me, and that was enough. What happened next was not precisely part of my plan, but I had spent years learning from Anita to understand that you cannot plan everything, you can only be ready. During the open remarks portion of the evening, when guests were invited to offer brief congratulations, my brother stood up. He crossed to the mobile microphone with the unhurried confidence of a man who has never once questioned whether he belongs somewhere. He adjusted his jacket. He smiled at the room. I just want to say a few words as Bridget's older brother. He had the practiced ease of someone who makes small talk for a living. I've always known my little sister was sharp. Our dad built a real legacy in Hamilton, Delaney Construction. Maybe you've heard of them, 30 years building this province. And I think Bridget got some of that drive from watching him. It's a family thing. He raised his glass. Obviously, I've been doing my own thing in development. We've got an exciting lakeshore project in its final stages, but tonight's about Bridget. Congratulations, sis, you've finally found your lane. He sat down to polite, slightly confused applause. Thomas put his hand over mine under the table. I counted to 10, then I stood up and walked back to the podium. Thank you, I said, and thank you to my brother for that generous introduction. Since he's brought up our family, I'd like to take a moment to be transparent with the people in this room. Because many of you work in construction finance, development lending, and municipal contracting, and I think honesty is long overdue on a few things. I looked at Anita. She gave me one slow, deliberate nod. Thomas walked printed documents to the AV coordinator, who had been briefed. Within 30 seconds, the projection screen behind the podium came to life. The Lakeview project, I said, which my brother just described as finishing its final stages, has been in technical default with its primary lender since last November. The bridge financing was arranged through a private fund, and the collateral pledged against it includes 2 commercial properties registered to Delaney Construction and approximately $1.4 million in construction equipment. The screen showed the loan documents, the interest arrears, the collateral listing. My brother had risen from his chair. His face was doing something complicated. The lender, I continued, which my father and brother have been making restructuring requests to for the past 8 months, is a subsidiary of the fund that Anita chairs, which is also, incidentally, the fund that holds the commercial mortgage on the Barton Street yard, and the CRA assigned arrears on 22 months of deferred HST remittances. Silence. In other words, I said quietly, The fund that has been keeping my father's company alive at Anita's discretion is the company Anita built before my father forced her out of it. My father pushed back his chair. I heard it scrape against the floor. Bridget, he stood up. His face had gone from white to something I can only describe as gray. You don't understand what you're. 14 employees, I said, as though he hadn't spoken, have been with Delaney Construction for more than 15 years. Their pension remittances have not been made in full for 21 months. I've submitted documentation to the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario. They opened an inquiry 6 weeks ago. My mother made a sound, a small collapsed sound. My brother turned to look at my father. His voice, when he finally spoke, was very quiet. Dad, you told me the pension issue was handled. It was being handled, my father said. And then, as though the pressure in the room had closed off every other exit, he turned the only direction he had left and looked at Anita. You've been holding this over me, he said. His voice had lost its shape completely. Anita stood. She was not loud. She didn't need to be. I gave you the better part of a year to make it right by those employees, Craig. I sent notices through 3 different channels. You ignored everyone. She paused, and the room was so quiet I could hear the ice shifting in someone's water glass 3 tables away. What I did tonight is nothing compared to what you did to me. What you did was deliberate. It was cruel. It took me the better part of a decade to recover from it. What I've done is simply called consequences. My father sat down. I don't think he chose to. I think his legs stopped working. Ryan turned on him fully then. All the polished social warmth evaporated. You told me the financing was sorted. You said the company could absorb the Lakeview exposure. I went into this project because you said we had room. I told you what you wanted to hear, my father said flatly. You wouldn't have made a different decision either way. Amanda, who had been entirely silent at the edge of the table, set down her glass, picked up her bag and walked out of the ballroom without a word. Ryan didn't try to stop her. I don't think he noticed she'd gone. My mother was looking at her hands. She had the expression of someone trying to locate the floor. 2 men who had been seated near the back of the room approached my father quietly. One of them showed him a card and said something in a low voice. Thomas told me afterward they were OSC compliance officers, present at Anita's prior arrangement. They weren't arresting anyone, but they were documenting. And my father, a man who had spent 30 years constructing a public face out of handshakes and civic committee memberships, understood precisely what that meant. My mother found me near the coat check. She had touched up her lipstick, which struck me as the saddest thing I'd witnessed all evening. Bridget. She reached for my wrist, not grabbing. She'd lost the energy for grabbing. Whatever happens with the company, that's between your father and whoever he needs to deal with. But you and I don't have to let this. Mum, I said. She stopped. Last night, you told me not to expect you tonight. You said watching me succeed would be too hard for my brother. I kept my voice level. I came home from my scholarship announcement at 16, and Dad asked me to keep it quiet at dinner so Ryan wouldn't feel bad about his marks. I graduated with distinction, and you told me not to make a big deal of it because Ryan was having a hard year. I looked at her. Tonight was supposed to be the one night where none of that applied, and you still couldn't give me that. Even when you decided last minute to show up, he showed up to undercut it, and you let him. She opened her mouth. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. Anger was something I'd burned through at 23, in a coffee shop across from Anita, after I'd heard everything. What I felt now was something closer to clarity. The particular stillness that comes when you finally stop waiting for something that isn't coming. I just need you to understand that I won't be available for Saturday dinner. I won't be available for quite a while after tonight. I need you to sit with that. I stepped back. She let go of my wrist. Thomas was waiting by the door with both our coats. Anita joined us a moment later, and the 3 of us walked out together into the October air, the city cold and bright and indifferent the way Toronto is in autumn, and I took a breath that felt like the first real one I'd taken in longer than I could name. Thomas had booked a small Italian place on King Street for 12 people. Around the table were close colleagues, 2 friends from university, Thomas's sister and her husband, and Anita, who ordered the tagliatelle and told a story about the first time she'd walked into a boardroom and been mistaken for the catering staff, and how she'd returned to that same room 20 years later as the majority shareholder. We laughed. The wine was very good. It was the nicest evening I can remember in a long time. There were difficult months after that night. My father's company entered creditor protection the following February. The pension deficit was significant, and the FSRA oversaw a repayment arrangement for the long-term employees, a process I was told took the better part of a year to resolve. My father and my brother are dealing with separate CRA investigations. I stopped following the details closely after I realized that tracking it was keeping me attached to something I needed to release. My mother emails occasionally, short messages. She mentioned at Christmas that she'd started attending a different church. I replied and wished her well. I meant it. What I return to when I think about that night is not the look on my father's face when he saw Anita in the spotlight. It's what Anita said to me the first time we met 6 years ago when I was 23 and furious and didn't know what to do with everything she'd just told me. She said, "I don't need you to fix this. I've already fixed it. What I need from you is to decide who you're going to be in spite of it." That's what I thought about when I accepted the award. That's what I thought about when I walked out of the Fairmont into the cold October dark. That's what I think about now. I didn't inherit anything from my family that matters. I built my own, and on the night they decided not to show up for me, the woman who had every reason to want nothing to do with anyone named Delaney stood in front of 250 people and said she was proud of me. That's the family I chose. That's the one that lasted. If any part of this sounds familiar, if you've ever done the quiet, exhausting work of outgrowing people who were supposed to hold you up, I want you to know the outgrowing is worth it. Not for the documents on the screen or any of the rest of it, but for the dinner afterward. 12 people at a table who genuinely wanted to be there, for the way that kind of warmth, once you actually find it, shows you clearly what you'd been missing all along. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk into a room knowing your family chose someone else's feelings over your moment. I'd really like to hear from you, and if this story meant something to you, please subscribe. There's more where this came from, and I'll see you in the next one.